Good morning. Hope you're doing well. On Thursdays, we've been studying the suffering servant passages in Isaiah. There are these passages in Isaiah that refer to this mysterious suffering servant. And when we get to the New Testament, we realize that that suffering servant is actually Jesus. So we've been looking at these passages, and today we come to one in Isaiah chapter 57. So if you want to take a second and pause things and read that passage. Read Isaiah 57. You can read the whole chapter, or maybe just read Isaiah 57 verses 1 through 5 and verses 13 through 19. Those are the main verses I'll be talking about today. So read that and come back. So Isaiah 57, it's a dark passage, but it forces us, Isaiah forces us to use our imaginations to, by faith, see what is real but unseen. I remember watching Polar Express with my family this year during Christmas time, and there was this great line I wrote down from Tom Hanks. He's the conductor in the little movie, and he says to one of these kids, he says, sometimes the most real things in the world are the things that can't be seen. Sometimes the most real things in the world are things that can't be seen. You can only see them by imagination. Eugene Peterson once wrote, this is a favorite quote of mine, "When I look at a tree, most of what I see, I do not see at all. I see a root system beneath the surface, sending tendrils through the soil, sucking up nutrients out of the loam. I see the light pouring energy into the leaves. I see the fruit that will appear in a few months. I stare and see the bare branches austere in the next winter's snow and wind. I see all that, I really do. I'm not making it up, but I could not photograph it. I see it by means of imagination." In Isaiah 57, Isaiah is forcing us to use our imaginations. The wicked and the righteous are suffering and perishing in verse 1, but it takes imagination to see beyond the suffering to the salvation that God brings even through death, which is peace and rest in verse 2. So Isaiah is challenging us to fuel our imaginations with truth, and he's doing that by encouraging us to see three things by the use of our imagination. The first thing I want to bring out is he's forcing us to see the unlikely friends of God, the unlikely friends of God. There is one in verse 15 who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose dwelling place is high and is a high and holy place. But he also, that verse tells us, dwells with the contrite and the lowly in spirit. You know, that word contrite, I'll come back to it in a little bit, is the Hebrew word for crushed. He dwells, that is, he lives and he's at home in a high and holy place, and also he is at home with the broken and the beaten down and the crushed and the burdened. And all of a sudden, there's real hope for us. He is at home with failures. He's at home with the hurting and with the oppressed and fearful and sinful. That really is real hope for us. And we see it when we get into the Gospels, right? Jesus, he is dwelling and he is eating with sinners and tax collectors, and he's letting the unclean touch him. You have to have imagination to see that he is with the contrite and lowly in heart, that he moves towards the broken, that he's attracted to the broken. All right, second, so first the unlikely friends of God, but second the undying dream of God. See, in verse 19, this I think is what I'm calling the dream of God. He says, "Peace, peace, to the far and to the near, says the Lord, and I will heal him." His dream, if you will, is a renewed, flourishing, whole, restored world. That's really what's behind that Hebrew word for peace, which is shalom. The first few verses of Isaiah 57 are so dark, as far from shalom and peace as you could possibly get. There's death, there's devastation, there's cultic worship, there's child sacrifice. And you know, it is discouraging to look at our world and see the brokenness of our world. And it can very easily make us and turn us cynical. And it takes imagination to see God's dream, to see this story of God, to see and believe that He's at work to make all things whole and new and flourishing and to restore everything. We need to catch this dream of God, that this is what He's doing, this is what He's after, and we need to live in light of it. And part of living in light of it is to say we're going to work to bring that world into being. Right now, we're going to do what we can to work for justice, to heal the oppressed and the hurting, and to draw near those who are crushed, and give them hope. So, all right, so first, unlikely friends of God. You got to see the undying dream of God. And then finally, you need to see the unshakable foundation of God's peace. In verse 18, it says that God sees all our ways, all our idolatry. And I know I didn't have you read the whole chapter, but all throughout the chapter, we're told about our idolatry. It's mentioned throughout that we have a collection of idols. But this holy God says in verse 18, I've seen His ways, but I will heal him. And it's a mystery in Isaiah. How will a holy God heal us? How will He do this? How can a holy God move towards us and accomplish this for us? I think the hint that we get in Isaiah 57 is from that word crushed in verse 15, because the last use of that Hebrew word for Isaiah was in Isaiah 53, where he said about the suffering servant in that passage that he was wounded for our transgressions, that he was crushed for our iniquities. And that takes imagination, that takes faith, to see this story that God's own Son would come and He would conquer death through death, that He would bring peace to us by being crushed Himself. And the hope of Isaiah is to say, if you come to this suffering servant, if you come to Him with your needs, with your brokenness, with your lowly heart, with your being contrite, then you will become the unlikely friend of God. And even more than that, it says God's dream, His undying dream of healing you and everything in this world now belongs to you as His friend. So I hope this encourages you today somewhat, and we'll be back next Thursday. I think after this one, we have 2 more lessons in the suffering servant on Thursdays. So look forward to seeing you next week. All right, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.